This case here coming up is a very important one to me in specific. I've been looking forward to and researching it behind the scenes actually for a while, and getting familiar with what I'm really going to speak on the actual topic. It's the case of Aaron Hernandez, and he is an official player who was at least a linebacker for a while with the NFL, the National Football League, which is interesting because, of course, the other player from before, Mr. Ray Lewis, also got indicted for capital murder but was let go, ironically enough. And Aaron Hernandez, who I hadn't been following the case really closely, but I had been researching it, he did end up getting convicted for capital murder, and none of his charges were ever dropped. And of course, I've made it a point kind of to bring this up in the past, but just in case anyone is not aware for some reason, I am not actually a fan of the NFL. You know, that is kind of somebody putting words in my mouth, so to speak. I've never been a fan of the NFL. To keep a room fairly calm and so on, I may have said certain things like I follow certain NFL players because I like to learn about how people operate, that sort of thing. But of course, it is correct. I've never been a fan of the NFL. We can look at any of the things that I own. Certainly there'd be merchandise related to the NFL if I was ever an actual fan of that. I'm more of a fan of soccer, always, and always have been, a fan of soccer. That's more my kind of forte. I followed that for a long time. But again, this is a case not a lot of people have heard about. The case of Aaron Hernandez. It's very important. And there are some links between this particular case because I 100% believe and can confirm based upon research that there are more murderers, or in other words, serial killers involved with the actual NFL and similar things with that than there are in pretty much any sport out there. And we're talking like in both genders, and so on. So I can officially say I've never been a fan of the NFL, which shouldn't really be too much of a surprise, I hope, to people. But I have attended, state, local games. I'm not ever going to lie to anyone. I don't want anybody to ever put words in my mouth for some reason, but I've attended certain games because I'm not going to turn down tickets for like a state game or something that's given away for free or whatnot. But I've never been a fan of the actual National Football League, which is fine. But I feel like there's a lot more accountability that needs to be had in the NFL in specific. And so this case of Aaron Hernandez, which is tied a little bit to the Ghisilane Maxwell situation, I hope you guys enjoy learning some of these things. And I'm going to be covering more of that in a later video. And of course, not going too in depth on Maxwell, so to speak, just to keep things, relatively calm out there. But it will be an in-depth kind of look at the Ghisilane Maxwell case. So here we go. This is Aaron Hernandez, who's an NFL player in Boston, Massachusetts for a long time. Thank you. Well, the Boston story has officially developed. Aaron Hernandez is charged with the murder in the first degree of Odin Lloyd, as well as carrying a firearm without a license, 2 counts of possession of a large capacity magazine, 2 counts of possession without a valid ID. He pleaded not guilty and is set with no bond. With Rob Gronkowski's injury, that leaves Jake Ballard as the presumptive starter. That's small potatoes. There will be plenty of time to get to the on-field ramifications, as it is dwarfed in comparison to the Aaron Hernandez case. This goes well beyond anything ever seen in NFL history. It dwarfs the Ray Lewis case, as Lewis, who was charged with murder in early 2000, pled guilty to obstruction of justice and received a suspended sentence without any conviction. Both Lewis and Hernandez were suspected of hiding the murder weapons and the murder evidence. Lewis by disposing of a tailored suit, and Aaron Hernandez by destroying surveillance camera video footage. Ray Lewis came out of things fine, but there are several key differences between these cases. There was more evidence that pins Aaron Hernandez to the crime scene than there was with Ray Lewis, including surveillance video of the actual murder, the rental car, and text messages. 2013 is more connected than the year 2000, and there is a digital footprint to follow. Although circumstantial, and it is important to remember the story is developing, but there is a lot more evidence that links Aaron Hernandez to the case than there was for Ray Lewis. That makes it harder for him to cut any kind of deals. So, of course, Hernandez was arraigned in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. He did all the running for the New England Patriots. Now he's the former running back at this point. But this was a very interesting trial. And the police believe that one of the men who was with Aaron Hernandez committed another murder. So they linked Aaron Hernandez twice to the murder also of Jordan Miller. So, and I'll be discussing that a little bit. It's believed that there were more than 4 to 5 different homicides that Aaron Hernandez was behind, but they couldn't prove the evidentiary link right at the time. But if you go back to the case now, there's a lot of details that have been released that were similar to the Ray Kurth case, who also had a suspended sentence. And never really got officially charged. But Aaron Hernandez, unlike Ray Kurth, actually got caught with all of the illegal firearms in his possession. And there's a lot of interesting takeaway one can take from this if they're willing to really examine some of the details that went on here. Patriots went up from 24%, it said, to 42.4% above average without Aaron Hernandez, and they play better. That's interesting, but that's not really my point of bringing this up. You can't really learn much from that because, to be honest, there isn't anybody in the NFL who's really probably not been involved in this sort of stuff. You know, the NFL is not a league that is really widely respected, and it's certainly not a sport that a lot of people respect. I would say overall, I think there's people who say that they like the NFL, of course, but I think that saying you like something and actually liking it is two different things. There's a lot of takeaway you can get from examining certain people in the NFL, and Aaron Hernandez is one of those because he shows a lot of the same signs that you would have seen with Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and also the Zodiac killer. And it goes without saying, folks, and I'll be discussing this just for a bit, that Aaron Hernandez kind of was raised this way, and people who are in the NFL, both genders, you know, females as much as males, are predisposed. I'd say that that's a perfect word for it, predisposed to commit certain aggravated crimes later in their lives. And we're talking like aggravated home invasions, robberies, serial homicides, things that would be no surprise to anybody who, meets some convicts on the street or meets some real rough people in the neighborhood. But you would be less inclined to believe it would occur with the NFL. But really, if you look at the history of the NFL, you will find countless examples of it happening. Both with the cheerleaders and the players themselves and so on. They are predisposed to these kinds of things. And so I want people to be able to learn more about Aaron Hernandez. And his cell phone records, interestingly enough, kind of connected him back to the killing of Jordan Miller and also the Ghisilane Maxwell trafficking network. So there's a few things that I will be covering regarding that, going into some more detail on why people need to be paying very close attention to these issues today. It says, even linked to just the two sets of murders, Hernandez was in rarefied air. That means this is a rare case. It's not every day that you find a former NFL star, a very, very high up in the NFL player, in other words, who's considered world famous, being an actual serial killer. And he was linked to at least 4 to 5 different murders of these victims. Looks like more, to be clear. But there was more than that. But for certain, Jordan Miller. And also linked, I'll just say allegedly for now, linked directly to the Ghisilane Maxwell situation. And so some of that is going to be covered. I'm going to cover a bit about that because I'm supposed to key in on these key points. It says no active NFL players have ever murdered people in 2 separate crimes. Of course, that is a lie. There's a number of examples where that's been proven to be inaccurate, be untrue, of course. But they're not going to say that in one of these news articles. But that is a league that has displayed over time a lot of serious psychological problems, manic disorder, and especially bipolar disorder. And I'm not talking about choosing sides here. I'm talking about, for both the players themselves in the league and also for the cheerleaders who are there in the league. They've got the exact same symptoms. And when you look at anybody who really drinks a lot or is very loud and things like that, not in every case, but in most cases you find that they are somehow affiliated with the NFL for some reason. So, and I'm not saying that football overall is to be frowned upon, and I'm not saying that necessarily, but what I am saying, of course, is the NFL and national football overall has never really been that good, and it's a very important thing to be able to point these key issues out in the time period that we are in, because there are numbers of serial killers who are part of the NFL. I think people deep down, they know that, but they've been covered for and they've had all these different things, but there has to be real accountability for the NFL. And for football overall to really be good at all, I would say. And I wouldn't have time myself. There are some friends of mine who have time to watch this sort of thing, but I wouldn't have time in most instances myself to get involved in this. I just like following some of the people who are a part of the league, and I will admit this any day of the week because I wanted to learn more about those people in the league and see what types of people really are in that environment. And the results have been fairly conclusive. They've shown definitely a certain kind of profile. That's all I'm going to say, but they've showed a certain kind of profile of behavior. Folks, I think there's a lot that we can take away from this and a lot that we can learn from this, or I wouldn't be making this video for you guys in kind of a short, in-depth study on some of the actions of recent NFL players and discussing this in a place like Boston, Massachusetts. So thank you. We're going to be going into this just a little bit and then moving on to what needs to really be dealt with. Thank you again. From having personally looked into this case and situation and started digging in pretty deep into it, there were actual photographs taken of Jordan Miller and one of the other victims, at least two of the other victims, before they were killed. And so I'm going to be going into some detail about that and also some of the aspects of allegations, whether or not those were confirmed, that link it to this trafficking ring with Ghisilane Maxwell. And I'm not going to go into too much depth on that, but I am going to be covering that as a focus point. And that's going to be between videos. You know, I know a lot of people have asked, what can we do about certain updates and things like that? And again, folks, you have to realize this is a very small team who does these things. We do it because it's kind of a job. It's part of the process. We make sure to get these things out there as soon as possible. But unlike others, the team is very small, and we're actually just doing this to be able to get the word out and get all the appropriate actions taken. So it'll be a 24-hour time difference between the two videos. And part 2 is going to go into more of the Aaron Hernandez case with what happened to Jordan Miller, why some of the crime scene photos have not been released for some reason, and other issues that are certainly around the NFL. So look forward to that. There is going to be new software in the not too distant future, which will be used for the live broadcast or live podcasting that'll be active. But this in this situation is basically going to focus directly on the NFL murders, why some of the swabs were incorrect, why some of the crime scene photos just seemed to have never been correct, and why they didn't release the crime scene photos of Jordan Miller, as far as Jordan Miller's body, which was shot, plenty of times. And can't go into too much detail on that. There's a lot going on, but when there's time, that will be detailed, and there'll be an analysis of why Jordan Miller may have been shot, and also why Aaron Hernandez was in the area. He claimed he was just going off to visit a colleague somewhere. Well, it wouldn't really add up when we look at the fact that Aaron Hernandez came back to the crime scene and his BMW, well, not his BMW, but his car was there. And there's a lot of people to this day who claim that Aaron Hernandez did not commit that crime. But I think that if he committed the armed robbery, like it suggests, that he probably did kill Jordan Miller. And so that's going to be something that will be explored. Thank you again. Be sure to get the word out. Like, comment, share the videos. Thank you. So, as was originally pointed out, and that you need to be very, very aware of, and for some reason this is important to make note of this as well. Aaron Hernandez of the NFL, the National Football League, was one of the most serious serial killers, one of the worst types of serial killers you will ever meet. He belonged to the New England Patriots and conducted Super Bowl 21 and 22. And this is important to cover for you guys because Hernandez and the Gators' defeat at the Oklahoma Sooners game meant a lot as it concerns world history. Having received the John Mackey Award as the nation's best tight end for the junior season, Hernandez announced that he will forego his season for this year and enter the draft. During his rookie year, Hernandez would score 6 touchdowns, just like Tom Brady. So he was very celebrated as an all-star, in this whole NFL kind of syndrome. And so this is very important for people to be made directly aware of this fact and the truth about it. Because the NFL is not ultimately good, folks. It's not a good organization. And it really has never been so, to be exact. There are a lot of killers and people like that in the NFL. Just like you will see in Hewlett-Packard, in these companies, in Disney, in Sony Records. There are a lot of them. And so it gets into the meat of why this video is going out fairly quickly, so it really gets to the wider public and ultimately gets to the widest audience. Okay? Is that world is not the world you want to be looking at ultimately. You don't want to look at the things, that you hear the crowd is going towards. You want to have your friends, we're going with the crowd, we're going to these different events, we're going to all these seasonal things. Because I will let you know right now, folks, that's a false world. You don't want to be looking there. And you want to avoid it as well, and stay away from the crowd, because that's where you will find true success, and that's truly where you will find lasting peace. So don't forget what has been spoken here. Take a second look at the NFL and what it truly is about. And in the next video is only 20 hours after this one, and the video that comes directly after it is going to be expanding upon that a bit more in part 2. So it's very interesting. It's a part of our history. And it shows what was going on with Aaron Hernandez and similar players in the NFL is a lot more serious. And it should be paid attention to a lot more than anyone would like to believe. Because that's where a lot of these serial killers and a lot of these issues originated from, is places like the NFL and places that are exactly like Golden Globes, things like that, with these large corporations doing the exact same thing that these banks did, essentially. And so when I say it about the NFL, it isn't anything to be derogatory to sports in general. It's to take it very, very serious, because this is what's been going on. And this is what truly happens out there. So don't follow the crowd. You'll see exactly why. Thank you.